Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 5th, 2018, and we're coming up on the outside, just 2 lengths behind and in the final stretch. Okay, I don't know, it starts to sound like a horse race thing all of a sudden, and I guess for that, we'll have to go to our horse race coverage. I think we're forced to do that as apparently this is one of the many media out there that everyone has such difficulty with. Turns out podcasting is a medium, too. That makes it part of the media. And so, therefore, we're going to do things as badly as everyone else just to catch up. I don't know. We got a long way to go, of course. Greg Dworkin will join us later on and attempt to keep us from actually doing that. There is 1 day left until what they're still calling Election Day, even though so many people are voting early, have already voted. Their job is done in terms of turning in the ballot, and now they're out there working to make sure that you, if you have not yet turned in your ballot, cast your ballot, or if you're planning on doing so tomorrow, that you absolutely, positively make it to the polls and get that job done. Lots of people knocking on doors, still having knocked on doors all weekend. Our door was knocked. I told the people there, yes. So that's fine. Our job is done until tomorrow. We're actually waiting until Election Day to cast the ballots. We're not going to be absent from home, as we very often, usually last like 10 years or so. I've been away on Election Day for various reasons. This time we'll be at home and bringing our brand new voter with us, so this will be exciting. And we'll catch up on all the craziness of the weekend, what's happening nationally. At this point, if there's anything numbers can tell you, we'll tell you all about it. If there's reason to ignore numbers and just hunker down and be sure to cast your ballot and make sure that anyone around you that might have any difficulty whatsoever getting to the polling place to cast their ballot, take them with you, strap them to the roof if necessary. This will work just fine for Mitt Romney. If for whatever reason you want to see him cast his ballot, I don't know why you would want to do that. Actually, I'd probably avoid, I don't know, what do you think he's going to do? I mean, I know how he'll be voting in the Senate race. So I guess that's something I was reminded of over the weekend. Everyone has turned their heads away. I guess we're going to have Mitt Romney back on the national scene after tomorrow as well. That's one of the downsides, I guess, of, free elections, really. Honestly, there's really no way of getting around that one. Plenty to catch up on from the election standpoint, plenty to catch up on from the Trump is an incredible liar standpoint, and it's getting worse, and by all reports, anybody who's keeping tabs on the volume of his lies, the depth of his lies, the insanity of his lies is just beside themselves at this point. They can't believe what this guy is doing, and he's really, I mean, There's just, I mean, I know you don't want to give in to the LOL, YOLO, nothing matters sentiment at this point, or really at any point. It's certainly hard to believe, though, that any of the old things about what a president should and should not be allowed to do, say, get away with are gone. And we'll catch up with all of that. Plus, there's an expanded view now. Everybody who's been holding their breath, including Robert Mueller, holding his breath until after the election to find out what's going on in that realm. There are a number of reporters who just couldn't wait, and it's okay by me. We'll catch up on this. But apparently a lot of people are in a lot more trouble than we used to think they were, even though we thought for a long time, for instance, that Roger Stone could at any point be convicted of treason in any one of 16 countries, probably. And he's back in the news, too. He's in more trouble than ever, and it's starting to look like any post-election reveal from Mueller. I don't know whether it will come right away, whether it will have to be delayed again because the scope of the investigation just keeps getting bigger and bigger, which I assume Republicans will almost, if there's any of them left after the election, will immediately attack as mission creep. But the people the mission is about are so creepy, I find it impossible to believe that they couldn't have arrived at this point. I'm glad to see that they did. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here to tell us about this minor event taking place tomorrow and what we know about it. And good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. We're doing just fine.
All right. It's and it's standard time again here. For those of you who are listening overseas, if you're listening to the show live, it is the only way it will make a difference. We screwed up the time and the clocks again. You know us Americans.
So it gets dark at 5 o'clock.
Right.
And I have to spend about an hour a day for the next week and a half trying to figure out how to change my watch to the proper time.
Yes, I have to go around and find all the booklets. How does this microwaves clock work? It doesn't
exactly.
Damn it.
The what a
car.
Pain in the neck.
All right. Well.
So how are you? It's Monday. We have one more day before the election.
Yes.
And things are looking pretty good for Democrats.
That is good news. And a lot of jokes over the weekend about Democrats not feeling good about the election, but that's just
Well, that's
par
what
for the
happens on
course.
Sunday. Sunday was did the Democrats blow it? You know, we have articles by longtime Democrats like Brett Stevens and short-term Democrats who just don't really know what's going to happen, but they thought they'd get their hot takes in. We get the hot takes from people like Matt K. Lewis and Aaron Blake about, well, if the Democrats take the House, is that good for Trump in 2020?
Yes, but only because it can't be good for John McCain.
Well, yes. And the thing is, though, that by this morning, with the new NBC Marist poll showing that Claire McCaskill actually has a lead in Missouri.
Excellent.
With questions about whether Phil Bredesen is actually tied with Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee. And with all the excitement about not knowing what the heck is going on with Texas with Beto O'Rourke, except that everybody knows they don't like Ted Cruz and he's a Zodiac killer.
My gosh.
The suggestion to Aaron this morning, which he said to me, thanks for reading, is why don't you write about if the Democrats take the Senate, is that good for Trump in 2020?
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, now is the time for your hot takes. You only have one more day. After that, you got to go by the data, and then it's not as much fun.
Right. Well, I say to help, I would like to help Republicans own the libs by making the taking of the Senate good for Trump.
Yeah, well, that may in fact be true.
Okay.
So, you got your choice of polls this morning.
Yes. All right.
But
I'll take this one here.
Let's look at some generics. You know, we have CNN out this morning with a double-digit lead for the Democrats, and we have LA Times with a double-digit lead for the Democrats, and we have Morning Consult with a 3-point lead for the Democrats. You know, so there's a little of this and a little of that. But I think what's important really is looking a little bit below the headlines there, under the hood, as it were, about some of these numbers. For example, the Quinnipiac poll came out this morning showing Bob Menendez with a 15-point lead. Wow. And remember, people were worried about that because, after all, you know, you got to vote for the crook because what's the alternative?
Right. Not much.
Not much. So Hugan, money guy, was spending a ton of money of his own on ads in the New Jersey area, pointing out that Menendez had been accused of all sorts of things that turned out not to be true, but he was putting them in the ads anyway, especially about underage prostitutes. So it's a really nasty campaign. But the Quinnipiac poll shows a complete flip in independent voters from Hugan to Menendez in just 2 weeks. Independent voters back Menendez 53-39 compared to 51-44 on October 17th, when the race looked a little closer. And Nick Corasaniti, who writes for the New York Times, is saying, what's changed since 10/17? Well, for one, as my colleagues Alex Burns and Jonathan Martin point out, I love Alex Burns, he's a very good reporter, Trump's racially tinged nationalism is proving a breaking point for many suburban GOP voters. Remember, this is the article that got a lot of criticism for saying, why don't you just say it's racist? Why is it racially tinged? But the point is made, and it's made there right there in the headline. And the fact of the matter is, many suburban GOP voters can't tolerate this. And we have some other information along those lines. This is from Nick Gorovich, Democratic pollster, who says the following.
That's all he says?
On election eve, some interesting things in final CNN poll before the election. The 55 Democrat, 42 Republican generic ballot, that's 13 points for those of you who want to know what the final score there is on the upper bounds of recent polls. The average is still about 7.5. But Democrats have only cracked 55% a few times in CNN's long-time series dating back to 1997.
Wow.
Now, some have criticized Democrats for not talking enough about Trump and focusing on issues like health care. Gasp. But this shows that many voters are going to make this about Trump no matter what. More people saying their vote is to oppose Trump than past presidents in midterms. Likely voters, November 1 through November 3, their vote is to support Trump 28%, oppose Trump 42%, not sending a message 28%. That not sending a message, I'm just voting because I'm voting for my local guy. I'm not trying to send a message to Washington or anything like that. That not sending a message of 28 is really low.
Yeah.
In perspective, for Obama, it generally not sending a message was like 50%, 54, 53. For George W. Bush, not sending a message was in the high 40s. People are sending a message.
I guess so. That's it's interesting. I never really gave that much thought to it until just now. The idea, there's lots of criticism for a long time. Oh, you're not talking enough. First, it was you're not talking enough about issues. Stop talking about Trump. You got to talk about issues. Then talked about issues, and then the question: Are you not talking enough about Trump? I guess for people for whom the election is about Trump, it was sold months ago. So really,
all this stuff was baked in months ago. Really, all of the local movement in the last couple of weeks is noise.
Yeah. All right. Well,
it's always been about Trump.
And it was always going to be for those for whom those people who were clamoring for tell me more about how much you hate Trump. I don't know that you could have said anything other than, you know what, I actually support Trump, that would have changed how they were going to vote no matter what. And I guess at some point you say, all right, well, I'll satisfy the critics who say I need to talk about some issues for a while because the Trump voting is done.
Well, not only that, it also gets to the heart of the is it turnout or persuasion argument.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Turnout is telling your base how much you hate Trump and why they should too. They already know that.
Yes. True.
If you want to persuade the independents, then you talk about health care, not how much you hate Trump. Because they can say, all right, I hate Trump too. What are you going to do for me?
I guess that was the last couple of weeks of the New Jersey race.
Yes. So below is Trump's approval on immigration, says Nick Gorovich from the CNN poll. And this is fascinating. More Republicans disapprove, 15%, than Democrats approve, 6%. That's Trump approval on immigration. And while those are small numbers, even a small defection rate from the base is something the GOP cannot afford, which is something to watch.
15%.
Gorovich also points out yesterday's upshot polls in some swing districts show a small but real GOP defection issue. What he means by that is if he looks to see, are you voting for Democrats voting for a Republican, or are you Republican voting for Democrats? There's a 4% loss on the Republican side. These are Republicans who say they'll vote for Democrats. And a 3%.
Don't bark at them. They're changing their minds. It's all right. Wow. I guess maybe one of the voters arrived, or unless it was a pollster. Someone come to ask you if you were voting?
Yeah, somebody, a canvasser probably.
Yeah.
But more salient here is when you look at the independents.
Yes.
The independents are breaking, in this particular Georgia 6 look, 53 to 33 for the Democrats. And that independent vote.
53, 30. All right. Yes.
53-33. That independent vote is what's going to decide a lot of these races. That's your persuasion side.
Very good.
Okay.
Georgia 6.
Georgia 6. Remember Georgia. That's Georgia 6 without Ossoff.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. In fact, I have a nice long thread from David Neer about that.
Good.
I don't know if you saw that one. Okay.
Yeah, very happy that Ossoff did this because he created a structure that lets other Democrats run.
Right. You thought we lost, but we didn't.
Well, we said that at the time. Even, for Beto O'Rourke, who may not take Texas, he's putting together a structure that allows Democrats to run from this point onward
Right.
And you put money into the local parties, this is a good thing. In the USC LA Times poll, getting back to my theme, continues to show Democrats with a hefty lead, 15 points on the generic ballot, 10 points on the probability forecast, which measures all voters and their likelihood of turning out. But here's the key that I wanted to talk about. Final, the USC LA Times poll, independents are favoring Democratic control of Congress this year by 62 to 38.
Okay. That's
25%. 1 in 4 voters, I don't know if it's exactly 25%, 1 in 4 voters say their view of Trump outweighs their view of individual candidates. And that group opposes Trump 3 to 2. So if you're voting on Trump, you're voting against Trump.
Yes, I suppose so, yes.
And just talking about that immigration thing there, 1 in 6 voters say the immigrant caravan is potential terrorists and a threat to the U.S., and that rises to 1 in 3 among Republican voters, but most of them don't say that. So part of the issue here is going to be, okay, fine, we get that, Trump is going around saying lots of stuff and being a jerk, and the conventional wisdom has always been, okay, well, that's going to help his base at smart politics. Actually, not necessarily true. There are Republicans you turn off with that. There are definitely independents you turn off with that. You definitely juice up the Democratic response to go send a message. And no, it's not clear that Trump has been helping the Republican Party by doing this. As a matter of fact, there's an article in the Politico today about Republicans panicking because Trump won't shut up about immigration. And the House people think that they're just getting killed in places like New Jersey.
I hope that is true. And that's another, I guess, an important distinction in the story you were just reporting, that they may actually, I guess Trump's strategists might be right, but they don't understand what they're right about. It might, in fact, be great for Trump's base to talk about immigration, but reminder, Trump's base might not actually overlap entirely with the Republican Party. It might just be a small sliver, a small splinter of certainly the overall population and the Republican population at that. It's great for your base. It's just that you never expanded your base to include the Republican Party. So, that would be great.
Trump has hijacked the election, says a Political article. House Republicans in panic mode.
Okay, good.
Okay, I like that. So that was probably my favorite headline from the day.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about what it means to have independents break that way. And then, of course, the other factor, several more factors. Again, we talked about this with Nevada voting. Yeah. We know who turns out. We don't know how they vote. We can count in Florida, for example, that in the early voting that just concluded yesterday, there were 2 weekend big days for Democrats, and now Democrats slightly outnumber Republicans in terms of who showed up to vote so far.
Okay.
Now, the projection model said that we had to come within 2% of the Republicans. Republicans always vote early. If we beat them in the early vote, that's a plus for us. It doesn't mean we win. That's what happened in 2016, and a lot of people turned out on Election Day voting against Clinton, and so she lost Florida by a small amount. But the early vote certainly says that we are positioned to win, and what we don't know are 2 big factors. Number one, how the non-party affiliated, that is to say independent vote, breaks. We don't know in Florida specifically. We know nationally it's breaking for Democrats in the late days of pre-election time. And
or so they claim anyway.
There's another thing that we also don't know.
Yes.
And that is, how are seniors going to vote? And the reason I say that is because the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, I sent you a graph of that.
Okay, let's see.
With red and blue bars there that you could find congressional preference by group, likely voters.
I see.
Democrats want a Democratic-controlled Congress 94-3.
Oh.
Republicans want a GOP-controlled Congress 91-6. Yes. And that's what I'm talking about. You get a few percentage point defection, and you get yourself a win in close races.
Right.
But more to the point, we know African Americans favor Democrats. Latinos do 57-29. They have to show up and vote, of course. 18 to 34-year-olds are showing up in 3 times their normal numbers. They favor Democrats 57-34. I'll get to that in a minute.
Stacked in overcoats?
But here's the key number that you may not have expected.
Yes.
Seniors over 65 favor Democrats 54-40.
Huh. I wouldn't have
And
expected
if it turns out seniors are voting up and you're counting them in the Republican column, you may be making a mistake.
Ah.
They heard what Mitch McConnell said about Social Security and Medicare. They heard it really well.
Oh.
And you may have been paying attention to the caravans because that's all was on cable TV. The seniors are thinking, wait a minute, they're coming from my Medicare and Medicaid.
Well, I'm glad they noticed.
They did. And so, again, you can't just look at the numbers and say, okay, well, I know who showed up, but I don't know how they're voting.
Yes, okay, that is true. We do not know.
I would point out there are, from rumor, Armando would know this better than I, but apparently there are some seniors in Florida, and they vote.
I have heard about this. This is a terrific place to find seniors.
Right. So I was talking with Mark Caputo this morning about this on Twitter, and we don't know how the non-party affiliate voters are voting. And, of course, we don't know who's going to show up tomorrow. But we're in good position there. It doesn't mean we win. The latest NBC Marist poll still has Nelson and Gillum ahead, and the Q poll has Gillum and Nelson ahead. And so we'll just have to count those votes and see what happens.
Okay. Well, I hope it goes well. Armando reports very frankly that he has suppressed his parents' votes in Florida.
Oh, good work.
So he says 2 less seniors voting for Republican. That accounts for the anomalous numbers.
That's the difference right there.
Yeah. So because there's like 4 seniors, as you noted earlier.
My question to Armando is, did they not vote early, or are they not voting on Election Day? He's going to suppress their votes.
Let's find out. We'll see. He's listening and looking for things to disagree with you about. I know this is true.
Oh, he'll find it. So anyway, so there's this whole background here, but I have to tell you, the vibes look and feel really good. It's not the generic ballots. It's not just the latest NBC Marist polls, which, by the way, show McCaskill up in Missouri. It's not any one thing, but one gets the impression from the CNN poll, from the Q poll looking at New Jersey and Menendez, that late breakers are breaking Democrats this way, which is the exact opposite of what happened in 2016.
Okay.
And that there's a lot of new voters and don't usually vote in midterm voters, enough so that it feels like a presidential election, even though it's not. Mm. And the numbers of people voting kind of bears that out. So it's going to be an exciting day tomorrow. And let's give you some other big overview pictures. This is from my Republican friend, Evan Siegfried. Final tea leaves for Election Day. Expect big turnout, especially with voters under 40. Economy strength not as big a boon to the GOP. A majority of Americans feel left behind. And watch the 65-plus vote who went big for GOP in 2014. That GOP margin has shrunk. Very same things I was saying.
I'm all right. I'm excited about this. This is good news. Oh, and we have a report in about how Armando rigged the vote in 2 states. So look at this. You can absolutely convict him on this. He suppressed his parents' vote by saying he was too busy, quote unquote, too busy to drive them to the polls. And then he says, meanwhile, I drove to Vermont to bring my daughter her absentee ballot. So
which state was suing people for doing stuff like that?
For
helping blind people and for telling them how the voting machines worked.
I think
was
I
that
saw
Georgia?
Those both in Georgia and in North Carolina. I believe we saw stories like that as well. But yeah, I think Georgia was the one that Josie Duffy Rice was writing about, talking about how Brian
in the New York
Kemp was
Times of all places.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Brian Kemp fiasco that happened over the weekend is also big news there for those of you who haven't heard. People noticed that the Georgia election apparatus is not particularly secure. As a reminder, Brian Kemp did not accept Department of Homeland Security help because he said everything was under control. In suits against the Georgia Secretary of State, a lot of the servers that had previous votes to check mysteriously got wiped. By the custodian of those records. So there's a long history of weirdness in Brian Kemp's history as being Secretary of State.
Yes.
So when it was noted that there were some discrepancies, that you could go on to the website and figure out what the URL is and then get access to the data you weren't supposed to have access to, that was reported by the Democratic Party to the powers that be. And Kemp got word of this and accused the Democrats of hacking the election, and then put a notice to that effect on the Secretary of State's official homepage. So anybody going to check times, dates, and locations would see this charge.
Ah, perfect. Exactly where you want it.
Yeah. So, it's bogus. It's crap. And it's only part and parcel of a lot of voting suppression efforts Kemp has done. But this puts him in the spotlight, and that makes it a little harder for him to change the vote after the fact. So, we'll see what happens there. But it's certainly motivating people to come out and vote. And a lot of new young voters are, in fact, doing that in Georgia.
Yes. It's been awful listening to all the storylines that all the things Kemp is grasping at. I was reminded yesterday, I think this is actually the case, Marcy Wheeler was saying one of the things that was missed about the reporting of the story that Brian Kemp, as he announced, was opening an investigation into this, was that the Secretary of State's office is not a law enforcement agency, wouldn't be capable of opening an investigation.
You'd expect the Attorney General to.
Yes, and the fact that I guess he either hasn't been persuaded to or refuses
to. Or that Kemp appointed himself Attorney General. Either way, it's kind of a big story, right?
Yeah. So not likely the case there. Just making things up as he goes along, which I am not convinced yet that he didn't simply get that as an order from the Trump camp. We will see. Not that he can't come up with it by himself. He's done it before. That also noted in the reporting of the stories is he has intentionally pretended to mistake reporting of vulnerabilities of their website as hacking in the past, and it has worked out poorly for him in the past, and hopefully it works out just as badly this time too. We'll be back after our 2-minute break with more of the latest stories with Greg Dworkin. Hang on. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are back once again. Greg Dworkin still with us. Time to wrap up, I understand. You got, work to do, or do you need to knock on doors? What are you doing? Okay.
So Tom Bonnier, who's a Democratic pollster who's been following the early vote, has some nice stats I just wanted to give you. So for the state of Texas, because there's a lot of interest in this Beto fellow, Beto is actually doing much, much better than any Democrat was ever expected to do, win or lose. And he's certainly occupying a lot of Ted Cruz's time, which is good, because if you pin the Zodiac Killer down to running for an election, he's got less time to do other things. So he writes here, an incredible 5.8 million ballots have been cast in Texas.
Okay.
That is 1.1 million more votes cast than in the entire 2014 election.
What?
And there's a lot of people who keep comparing this to 2016. It's not the right comparison. We're talking about a midterm here. Mm-hmm. Voters age 18 to 39 account for 24% of those ballots. They were only 13% of the early vote in 2014. And these are not minor shifts that we're witnessing. Okay, so a lot of people are voting. A lot of young people are voting. He also notes 2.5 million Hispanic voters have cast a ballot already, at least those who are willing to self-identify as Hispanic.
Okay.
Latinx. At this point in 2014, Hispanic voters had cast 1.1 million votes. That's more than double. The surge is greater than that measured among any other race or ethnic group.
Oh, well, okay, that makes some sense.
But that also may talk a little bit and speak a little bit to Trump's maneuvers over the last couple of weeks, making the caravan his ending argument for Republicans.
Yes, right. Well,
You want to
that's
mobilize Latinos, Hispanics? Why don't you talk about how the Mexicans and the Guatemalans and the Hondurans are coming to take your grandkids and eat your puppies?
right. And anybody who's already here who might look a little bit maybe like they even had some relatives there should absolutely be shot on sight. And well, it's
Tom
probably
had
making you
another
uncomfortable.
observation from the other day. To those suggesting the percent increases in youth vote are misleading, try this statistic.
All right.
In 2014, at this point in early voting, voters over the age of 65 outnumbered voters under the age of 30 by 9-1.
Okay.
2014.
All
Of
right.
today, that's been cut to 5-1.
Okay, well, the number is lower, although I hate the outnumbered part. But yes, still lowering the advantage by half. I got my numbers
It really
correct.
have. It's pretty good. And remember what we said about age 65 and above.
They're
Don't
old.
automatically assume those are Trump and Republican voters. They're quite concerned about
not
Social
anymore.
Security. That's going to
Okay.
be one of the hidden, after the election, we go back and look at it, numbers that I think it's going to be most interesting to examine.
Yes, that's true, and it will make a great opportunity if the numbers bear it out to say, in addition to Donald Trump being a moron and a jackass, maybe Mitch McConnell isn't that wise and
Brilliant a strategist to
hip
bring
to-
that
yeah,
up
right.
for the election when he didn't have to. Is that what you're saying?
yes, that is what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's correct. All right, so
Okay.
let me finish with this. This is from The Hill by Reed Wilson, who's a pretty good reporter. New poll results in a surge of younger and first-time voters
Yes.
heading to the polls in the days leading up to Election Day have Democrats considering the possibility that a big blue wave is about to crest over the midterm elections.
Oh.
For months, polls have showed voters are rabidly enthusiastic about the midterm, both sides, and actual results are proving the polls correct. More than 34 million people have already cast their ballots early or by absentee. That's more than 50% increase over the total number of early votes cast in 2014. Turnout is up among all age cohorts, racial groups, and educational categories. Older voters still make up a disproportionately large segment of the electorate, but turnout has increased the most among younger voters, minorities, and people who rarely or never vote. Among voters aged 18 to 29, turnout is up in 39 of 41 states for which data is available, says John Del Volpe, who directs polling for Harvard University's Institute of Politics. He does the millennial polls and predicted that it was going to be hard. It's going to be higher this year than normal, even though it's always hard to get those voters out. And these are voters who typically don't vote in midterms. There's about 10% of the electorate that's completely brand new. 10%. That is, again, significant numbers. The number of infrequent and first-time voters are both more than twice as high as the number of those voters who turned out in 2014. Okay.
Nice. Okay.
Now, both Democrats and Republicans have turned up in greater numbers than in years past, so it's not like our side votes and theirs doesn't. But the Democratic gains are outpacing the Republican gains. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. What makes it a wave is when you win all the close votes, not that you clobber your opponents by 10 points in every single race. The last batch of upshot Siena polls that they were giving us in these borderline districts are all pretty favorable. Not all, but they're mostly favorable to Democrats. Even the ones where Republicans are leading, they're only leading by a tad. And Evan Seyfried, again, that guy I mentioned before, Donald Trump is good for interest in government. Trump is good for turnout, both sides, but higher turnout can change the fundamental calculations that show Democrats would lead over Republicans on the so-called generic ballot. Pollsters use past turnout and current assumptions about voter enthusiasm to estimate what the electorate will look like, which means that a disproportionately young and new electorate may throw off those estimates. So the real question is having the polling models get the turnout right and account for the surge in voter registration. If they haven't, then this could potentially be a giant tsunami you didn't see coming.
Well, so the good news would be wiping out Republicans. The bad news would be you have to spend the next 4 to 6 weeks explaining that polling is real.
We'll see.
Okay.
But again, I will say this. One hot take that I'm absolutely going to stand by on Wednesday morning is some pollsters are better than other pollsters.
Okay, yes. And that's where Armando will start calling.
Yeah. Well,
no,
look, I mean, Morning Consult says it's a 3-point lead in the generic, and LA Times says it's closer to 15, dude. So is it in the middle? Is the LA Times right? We'll see. We'll have more of that to say when I'm back with you on Wednesday.
Okay.
And we actually have some results to go over, which will be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
I wish I could get in line now to vote tomorrow, because I don't get to vote till tomorrow. But with that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with your friend and mine, David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. And maybe Armando has time to come up.
He does, because he's not driving his parents to the polls. So we could try that out. Okay.
Yeah, drive us crazy instead of them. Come on and talk about what's going on in Florida and talk about what's going on with polling, Armando. That'd be very good.
Okay. Well, I think he's ready to do it. He's already getting set. All right, that's fine. We could use the additional help. I mean, there's very little happening, as you know. It's not too much. Okay. Well, we'll see. All right. Thanks, Greg.
This is hot take day. I mean, you said all the work's done. If you can still phone back, that's great. If you have work to do tomorrow, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But today is sit back and do hot takes, because we're just waiting for the results.
Yes. Although if there's doors that haven't been knocked on, you can absolutely show up at your local campaign office and find something to do. And start organizing rides to the polls as well. If you happen to be, I don't know, an Uber driver, for instance, and have that kind of capacity. There's
always stuff to do. People need volunteers. But if you're a pundit,
donuts are needed.
There's nothing for you to do at this point.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I'm not that unless I am. Well, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll see what happens the rest of the day. If I'm busy.
And is it good for John McCain? That's what we need to know. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Greg. And hang in there. And I think we fulfilled our mission as far as Karen sees it. The number one podcast goal for today: don't stress me out. I think we've done it.
The news is good, but we'll have to wait till tomorrow to see just exactly what that means.
Yep. Okay.
Take care, and I'll talk to you Wednesday.
Very good. Thanks. We'll see you after. Everyone will be able to breathe next time.
Right. My brother Armando, hi. I know you're not on yet, but come on and tell us what's going on. See you tomorrow.
Very good. Thanks again, Greg. Okay, so let's see. All right, so the one-way pipeline thing here is clear. So Armando, if you wanted to give us a call, I guess you have something to say about polls and how they suck. And I don't know whether you've gotten any friendlier with the concept over the past couple of years or not, but we're willing to find out. Let's see. Let's pick up on the other comment or two here. Mad Hatter tells us, by the way, Texas, just backing us up, and this is good for you, Karen. Texas may shock tomorrow. Beto has energized voters, and people hate Cruz. This is not news per se, but now, wait a second. Why is Armando, for some reason, your Skype call is not registering on the computer I need it on. What is going on here? But it's going to make a lot of noise nonetheless. Here, hang on a second. Is there any way for me to... Why is this happening? Let's see. I think I can turn that off by getting rid of that call. But that is Armando. But for some reason, the Skype on the laptop registers his call, but the Skype on my desktop, which is what I actually need in order to have him join us, will not register the call, and I have no idea why that might be happening. Let me try. I guess I could try calling Armando, and then that would work. But let's see. Let's see if we can give that a shot. All right. Clicky. Let's see. Let's try that one. Okay, let's give this a shot. Now we have to listen to the stupid music again, of course. Hey, Armando.
Hey, David.
Hi. Hey, I don't know what was going on. I saw your call, and everybody heard the ringing that was going on in my ears, but the computer wouldn't actually bring up the button that says answer this call. So, okay.
Okay.
I'm kind of at a loss for that one, so I figured I'd call you. And that's the problem. I was using polling software to talk to you, and everybody knows that doesn't work.
It was modeling the call.
Right. You were not a likely caller at the time, so we ignored the input.
Exactly. I was certain to call. But actually, it gets to a point, though.
Yes.
Polling is hard all the time. And I think my biggest problem is not with polls per se. I just think pollsters overstate the certainty of it. One of the biggest problems they have is we polled 2,000, like the Morning Consult. They have 1,921 respondents.
Yes.
And they have a margin of error of plus or minus 2.
Right.
Well, that's just a lie in this sense.
Oh.
Because if they were just taking the universe, for example, if I have actually someone who thinks they shouldn't even apply likely voter models. They say, oh, they're more accurate. They really haven't been more accurate than RVs in a long time. And by the way, it's helpful to us that this year, which is unusual for Democrats, that a likely voter poll is more favorable than a registered voter poll because the enthusiasm gap. It's an off year. The president holds the Republicans hold the White House, which all those factors go in. I just think they're guessing at who's going to vote. Yes. I wish they would actually. There's got to be a better with all this early voting.
Yeah,
I just feel that they are not using a lot of data that's out there. Like, I think Greg was mentioning Tom Bonnier before, and Bonnier's done a very detailed study of who's voting, what's the age cohort, what are their party registration. By the way, party registration, particularly in the South, is not that indicative of self-identification, which is really what generic ballots are about and things like that. I know Mark Caputo, for example, is a good reporter. In Florida, he keeps looking at the registration databases and says, well, it looks like it's going to be slight Democratic lead in the early vote, which is what it looks like, about 0.5%, which is pretty good. It was higher in 2016, just so people know, but we lost Election Day by 11 points, and that's why we lost. But I honestly don't think that's going to happen for a couple of reasons. Why is this not going to be 2016 where our early vote lead gets wiped out? Because in this, you can actually analyze the early vote.
Yeah. And
you can see that a large swath of the Republican early vote is Election Day voters from 2016.
Okay.
So a lot of that lead, it's cannibalization, strictly speaking. But listen, a vote's a vote. You want to put it in the bank. It's just when you're modeling what's coming next, you have to take into account that a lot of the certain voters, at this point, the pool of certain voters is a slight advantage to Republicans. Usually it's a bigger advantage on Election Day. And the idea here is that will they run up a big score? I don't know that that's going to happen. And then the other real problem with the analysis of just looking in Florida, I'm talking specifically, how many Republicans versus how many Democrats voted is the no party affiliation. The independent voter is about 24%, 25% of the total vote. Actually, it's higher than that. I got the number wrong. It's more like 32%.
Oh, okay.
And how is that breaking? If you believe the polls, Democrats in Florida have a double-digit lead among independent voters. Now, if that's true, it's actually going to be Gillum by 7 and Nelson by 6 and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's necessarily going to be that because it never is. It's generally 5 points one way or the other. So I think if it swings 5 points in our way, we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah,
we'll see. You never know until in Florida. I can't remember an election of recent vintage that has been decided by more than a point or two, one way or the other.
Okay.
I'm talking 2016 was 1 point, 2014 was 1 point, 2012 was 1 point, 2010 was 1 point. And the big landslide victory was Obama beating McCain in 2008, and he beat him by 3 points. So it's hard to fathom that Florida all of a sudden became a 7-point state one way or the other.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
But I will tell you this, if it is a 7 points, win or even a 5-point win, we're going to win a lot more House races in Florida than people expect.
I guess so. If it actually came to 7, that'd be enormous.
If it came to 7, we'd win in places in Florida that you just could not imagine we would win.
We would.
So I think there's that. Overall, I don't know what the generic ballot means much anymore. I do know this, that herding happens, and the way herding happens, and I believe, for one, I'm pretty sure NBC heard it. It's poll. Listen,
yes,
they're good pollsters.
Okay.
But they play the game a little bit. This is Peter Hart and Bill McInturf. These are guys, they call it independent, but they serve a news organization's mandate, and they like being a story. It's 7 points, 8 points is a story, right? Because everybody says, 5-6, it's a draw. The Democrats have to win by 7 or 8 to take the House and win this and win that. And I don't know. That may be true. That may not be true. No one can say for sure. But I know that very skeptical that they just didn't tweak a few things and add a few more Republicans to the likely voter mix, and that's all you need to do.
I see what
John
you mean.
Zogby was an expert at that. I mean, Rasmussen is ridiculous. I mean, I think they have Trump at 50% approval and 10 points above everybody else.
So there's there are methodologically acceptable, I was going to say methodologically sound, but methodologically acceptable methods of fixing things. I mean, it is interesting that everybody has sort of come in around that 7 mark, not the 7 points by which you think, by which some pollsters are predicting winning generic ballot in Florida, but the overall national congressional generic ballot. It fluctuated for a while, and then I guess when they finally settled on the narrative, essentially, that 7 points was about the minimum, maybe 7, perhaps 8 points was about the minimum that it would require, given the various factors, gerrymandering, institutional advantage for incumbency, etc., that it would take for Democrats to win a majority in the House. And then another couple of weeks of uncertainty about whether or not this was really going to be a wave election or not. And then basically it's like the two narratives converged, and then everybody said, I don't know whether this is actually what happened with their numbers, or did everybody just say, well, if we say it's 7, then that gives us a 50-50 shot or so of where people think we should be about being right. If it works and there's a wave, we say, the minimum that was necessary for a wave was what we said. And if it doesn't work, we say, well, like we said, waves can dissipate, and that would happen at around 7. So 7 should be where we put the difference in the generic ballot. And every time I poll this, I get 11, and it's worrying me that everybody else in the industry is getting 6 to 8. What can I do to methodologically change our numbers so that they end up coming around 7 or 8 without being accused of just fudging it? And the answer is our model. So some of these people just won't vote, or more of these people will vote than I thought. And I don't know why I think that. I just do. And look, my number comes out to 7.5 now.
Exactly. I mean, it's that simple. You can just tweak, I'm going to add this variable that I know will push Republican up. I'll say I'm going to add an LV that they voted in the last 3 elections.
Yes.
Right?
As
and
opposed
of course,
to 2.
If you do that, you're going to knock out a lot of people.
Right.
Democrats. So you sort of rejigger your likely voter model.
This is how I do my bracket in March, by the way.
Right.
I say, this is how I pick a winner, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. I don't know. 215 doesn't seem right.
I just think people overstate the accuracy of polling generally. Because, listen, you missed by 2. You had a pretty good day as a pollster. Yeah. You missed by 2.
Well, that was plus or minus. You said plus or minus 3, and you missed by 2. You were actually, that's a win. You got an A. You did the math right.
You got an A. So if you missed by 6, that's not great, but it's not.
Yeah. B, take the makeup test.
If you missed by 5, guess what? You missed the election.
Yes.
Two people, the result. Like I expect somebody to win by 6 and the other win by 1. I missed by 5, but I got it. I got the winner. Well, you didn't really get it. You missed by 5.
Yeah, I guess that's true too.
The
Two ways of
classic in the
measuring it.
genre of that was the LA Times poll. And by the way, we like the LA Times poll this year because it has a generic ballot at 14 or 15 or 17 or something ridiculous. But they had Trump winning by 5 or 6 in the popular vote. And of course, Trump didn't win the popular vote. He lost the popular vote. But they trumpeted how they nailed the election. It's like, no, you didn't. You actually
won, like we
blew
said.
the election.
Yeah,
so,
that's right. Trump won like we said. No, Trump won, but not like you said.
Exactly. You didn't say he's going to win the Electoral College. You said he was going to win the popular vote by 5. And he didn't win by 5. He lost by 2. You missed by 7. Yeah, it was a pretty bad miss.
Yeah, I guess so.
And the fact is,
funny.
it really wasn't that bad a miss because polling is pretty inexact. The best polling is presidential election polling because the participation rates are much higher.
Yeah.
There. Polling is. Are you kidding me? Listen, I actually think that we have reason to be optimistic that we'll take the House. Reason to be optimistic. I think that the 80% likelihood figure sounds about right to me. That's 4 and 5. And there's 2 reasons. It's not just the popular vote's going to be 7 or plus, and I think it will be 7 plus. It's that for once the geography is going to help us. And I'll tell you why people in my opinion, are getting it wrong a little bit on that. They're so used to the Electoral College thing blowing us out in the presidential last year. In 2016 because we lost by 10,000 in Wisconsin and then 17,000 in Michigan. These just fluky things that happened and just the concentration of look. It all comes down to white no college voters being racist. Sorry, I said it out loud. And they vote. We according to the NBC poll, and I think this finding is probably pretty close to correct. We trail among white no college by 34 points. White no college. Remember the vaunted white working class.
Right, I know. I've been eating in their diners for 2 years.
By 34 points among men and by 16 points among women. So somewhere around 25 points when you add it all up. But we lead with white college by 16 points. 27 points with women and 8 points with men, white college men. And the geography of the contested districts this year is such that there's a lot of rural districts that are just deep red that are white no college, and we're not going to win this. That geography could hurt us in Minnesota 8 and a few other districts that we wanted to contest. But even in Iowa, the districts that we are going to win, except for possibly Steve King, which I'll believe that when I see it. I don't think we're going to win that race, but hope springs eternal. Is the Des Moines suburbs, which is college-educated, dominant.
Yes.
Pennsylvania, college-educated, dominant. Outside New Jersey, we're going to win gangbusters in New Jersey. By the way, you saw the Kiniak poll, your old boss. Final Kiniak poll has your boss up by 15.
That's what I heard from Greg.
Okay, so
he was reading
there was all this.
That's
just the Cook report for whatever reason rated it a toss-up.
Sure.
I don't know what they're talking about.
Toss out.
You lose races that you're supposed to win, but that race has never been a toss-up. It just hasn't been.
That's their favorite game, of course, is New Jersey Senate races. A toss-up hasn't been won by a Republican since forever, but toss-up.
It just isn't. I mean, there are some years it could be a toss-up. Say the Senate race in 2010, and there wasn't one in New Jersey, thank God, because we would have lost that year. That's the year Christie beat Corzine for governor.
Okay, yeah.
And it was
Governor's
just
a
a whirlwind of things that happened.
Yeah.
Because you can't expect that. Now, Pennsylvania, this is a whirlwind, a bad year for. If Toomey was running this year instead of 2016, strangely enough, we would have thought the presidential election year would have been better. But if you had Toomey in this race, you would have beat him.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. So I think that what you're looking at is the geography of suburb. And why do I pick New Jersey? New Jersey is highly college-educated voter electorate. Leonard Lance is going to go down in his district. Why is he going to go down? He's going to go down because the college-educated whites in his district. I think we might, I believe MacArthur's going to go down.
Okay.
And his district is less white college, but it's enough that I think he's going to go down.
Yeah.
The Philly suburbs will. I think Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania will go down in Central, and that's actually more white no college as well. But there's still enough white college that the geography of it actually works in our favor here. I think we're going to win a lot of districts in Florida that are urban. Miami, I think the Cuban wall is going to crumble for Curbelo. I think Shalala holds on in that district. I think the Trump effect is a big part of that. Oh, by the way, the vaunted Kavanaugh effect in Florida.
Yeah.
Most voters by 6 points, I believe the number is, which is the margin just about, are supporting more likely to support a candidate who opposed Kavanaugh than supported him.
Well, that's good.
So I just, that was always going to be sort of washy. It was going to help enthusiasm in some places.
Yes.
But by and large, if you look at it from a national perspective, it isn't going to be positive for Republicans.
Well, good. I should hope not.
I hear music.
Yes, the music tells us we have just a few seconds to exit for our 1 minute break at the top of the hour. True. You can hang on if you like and dance along with the music or just relax. But yeah, good news that there's no Kavanaugh effect per se for them. There ought to be. They don't deserve it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just that short little break just allows us to reset a little bit. Let's see. Polling still top of mind for you, or have we delivered the message on polling? Or
not polling per se, but consequences a little bit.
Okay.
One of the great follows that you'll find, or two of them really, and they sort of overlap, is Taniel. On criminal justice reform issues and Stephen Wolf. I'll focus on Florida, which I know best.
Okay.
Florida, the governorship is important for all the reasons you can think of, but let me give you three more.
All right.
You'll know why the Senate is important because that's the federal government. Let me tell you why it's going to be important in Florida if these polls hold up and we can pull off this win. First, the governor, the day after he's sworn in, will name in Florida three new Supreme Court justices.
Oh.
In fact, there's a fourth who's on the ballot, a Scott appointee who's up for retention. We have this stupid retention thing,
I see.
Which I totally disagree with, but there you have it. Most of the times they get retained. I voted to throw him out because he was a Scott appointee. So it's possible, I guess, that there could be four.
Okay, I see.
Supreme Court justices, but there will be at least three. And that's hugely important in Florida itself, of course, but also nationally in terms of redistricting. For example, Andrew Gillum negotiates with a Republican-controlled legislature in Florida. Florida will have 29 House seats after the 2020 rebalancing is estimated. 29, and its electoral college votes in 2024 will go up to 31. How you district those is going to be very important. So you need Gillum not only to negotiate the best terms possible for Democrats on redistricting, though there is in theory a redistricting commission, but they throw it out. Nobody ever pays attention to it. So it's a real negotiation. But finally, that those maps are subject to challenge, and they go to the Florida Supreme Court.
Okay. Yes.
We need 3 more Democratic votes on the Florida Supreme Court to stop Republican gerrymanders or defend Democratic gerrymanders. So we're so terrible at gerrymandering, but that it doesn't much matter. But beyond that, it's not easy to gerrymander favorably for Democrats when you have to respect the Voting Rights Act and majority districts, etc. So at any rate, we need to have a fair redistricting. That's one of the most important things. And what that means is you're talking about 29 seats. If you can make 5 districts fair and get a net 4, let's say, 4 House seats, that's huge. Look what's happening in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
When the Pennsylvania Supreme Court struck down that gerrymander and redistricted Pennsylvania, we're going to hopefully net out 5 seats out of that. You add 4 here, 5 there. All of a sudden, you're talking 20, 25 seats, and that's generally the difference between the parties. So that becomes hugely important. Another criminal justice reform issue that is under the radar and maybe by design. We have what's called Amendment 4. Amendment 4 would restore voting rights to nonviolent criminal felons in Florida.
Right, okay.
There are over nearly 2 million Floridians who don't get to vote who are nonviolent criminal felons. 2 million. It's a huge number.
Yes.
Now, obviously, these may not be reliable voters, but let's say you get 500,000 of those voters. That swings elections. Now, that requires getting to 60%. That's always close in Florida. Sometimes they pass, and sometimes even when they pass, the legislature overrides it. So what you need is, frankly, someone like Gillum to stop the Republican Party from ignoring the will of the referendums passed by the voters. They did that, frankly, in 2016. Marijuana was passed in Florida, and the legislature and the governor basically said, I don't care. And marijuana is tightly controlled, much more tightly than it should have been as a result of the referendum. So that's all these different reasons why the Florida governor race in many ways is perhaps the most important race in the country.
All right. Well, that is it's a good reminder.
So there's that. Now, are there other important governor races? Of course there are. I mean, Wisconsin has similar issues. It just have less congressmen, less to gerrymander. It only has 10 electoral votes, and may have only 9 after next redistricting. 31. Why is Florida more important than Wisconsin? Because 31 is more than 9.
Yes, by all reports.
By all reports. So that's why I think of it that way. It's great that Beto O'Rourke is making a fight of it, and maybe he pulls the shock of the night in Texas, but it's somewhat disappointing that we have no chance in the Florida governor and the Texas governor's race. But it is what it is. I don't know if Beto running as a Democrat for governor would have made that race competitive, possibly, but it's not competitive now. And Texas is the other big state that, we're going to get gerrymandered the heck out of us. We're not going to come close to flipping anything there on a statewide basis, and that's going to have repercussions going forward. The Pennsylvania race stays strong for us. Wolf is winning by 26, I believe.
Wow.
Casey's winning by 18 over Barletta. We're going to win a lot of seats there. I think that the reality is whether we win the House or not is mostly going to be decided in the first hour. If we pick up enough New Jersey, Pennsylvania seats, if we pick off a seat in Maine, Bruce Peloquin. By the way, the Maine governor race finally looks pretty good for Democrats after pissing those away by having these independents run against our guys.
Right.
For whatever reason, voters seem to have finally learned, and the independent this year is getting minimal support. The Democrat, people flocking to the Democrat. We're going to lose some governorships. Not lose, but we won't take back some governorships that may surprise people. But I think it's worth noting that there is a difference between, say, the Republican in Vermont and in Massachusetts and in, well, New Hampshire, I think would be more traditionally Republican Sununu. But Scott in Vermont, a guy named Phil Scott, is a Republican in name, and I believe in name only. If you think of Republicans as what the Trump is, they have nothing to do with Trump.
Okay.
Charlie Baker in Massachusetts has very little to do with Trump. Well, it'd be better if a Democrat
yes.
held those governorships, but there's no gerrymandering issues there. In Massachusetts, for example, every single representative in Massachusetts, every single one, is a Democrat.
Yes.
The 2 senators are Democrats. So the fact that the Republican holds the governorship, again,
it's always been weird.
It is negative, but the reality is even there's certain limitations because the Democrats have veto-proof majorities.
Right.
In the legislature, they can do whatever they want. So it's a little different. The same in Vermont. Democrats hold veto-proof majorities. It's a local Republican. It's just a title. It's like Michael Bloomberg was a Republican type.
Yes.
He was.
You need to remember that because he's about to try to run as a Democrat.
He's going to run as a Democrat, of course. I mean, the reality is there is no more Republican Party. Being an independent sounds nice in certain districts. Angus King is an independent ostensibly in Maine, but he's one of the more liberal members of the Senate. If it helps him to call himself an independent, I don't care.
Yeah.
He's basically a Democrat. This is a little different than Bernie, who, while he caucuses with Democrats, is very critical of Democrats. King is a team player and plays differently than Bernie does. So you don't have to think of it that way. The other one is Maryland and Hogan, and that's a shame. Ben Jealous is a good man. I wish he could win, but he's not going to, I don't believe, in Maryland. But Maryland also, I believe, has super majorities, Democrats. So it's not as if, again, there is a little bit of gerrymandering involved that perhaps Hogan defends a couple of Republican seats in Maryland that shouldn't exist. Actually, I believe there's one only. I think O'Malley had redistricted out the second Republican district in Maryland. So there's only one in play there. It's just not the same thing, it strikes me.
Right.
So those will be called Republican victories. They will be Republican victories, I suppose. There's no taking that away from them. They're just not that as meaningful, and they're certainly not Trump endorsements. Right. These are Republican governors.
I guess I've lost your audio here.
Away from
Trump. There you are.
To Ron DeSantis in Florida, who was the Trump candidate.
Yes,
so Trump is on the ballot in Florida. He's not on the ballot in the governor's races in Massachusetts or Maryland or Vermont. None of those 3 Republicans have any support for him at all. So those are different things. It strikes me.
That's a good thing, although I always worry about that because one, I'd rather win those races, of course, and 2,
of course,
what do we say? I guess the landscape is strewn with never Trumpers who have somehow transformed to Trumpers.
These guys have been never Trumper the whole time. They really haven't. This isn't Brett Stevens. This isn't Noah Rothman.
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham, God knows what he is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I saw people who spent months, a year, saying Trump would be a disaster. It's ridiculous. He's a joke. How dare you even consider him? And I love him. He's the best. I'll do whatever he says.
I get that. I understand what you're saying. And
if they're the only Republicans around for Trump to cozy up to or threaten, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? I think you read them right. It would be a tremendous surprise, whereas it was not a tremendous surprise for Lindsey Graham, as strident as he was in his anti-Trumpism. If you asked me even then at the time, do you think he'll ever, if Trump were to win and head the party, do you think Lindsey Graham would stand in opposition against him all this, throughout his term and then run as an anti-Trump for re-election? I probably would say that's a good point. He probably won't. He probably will flip. Huh? Yeah. I guess that's true. Whereas I might not say that about northeastern Republicans in particular, where it just doesn't make as much sense.
Right. Yeah. No, Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, though, he didn't have to be who he became.
No, he didn't have to be.
This shows who he always has been. He's been.
Maybe that's the way. That's how I would have arrived at the answer.
What he is.
Yeah. South Carolina being what it is, I would say, well, that factors in. But, yeah, I didn't trust Lindsey Graham from the start. So, would he if you asked me at a certain point, I would have said, I see no reason for him to change his tune so dramatically. But could he, if the circumstances were right? Yeah. Oh, I don't think he would stand pat. No, not in a million years.
So. He has the leading Trump supporters, and he makes a fool of himself daily. And it's funny because of the shock in the media. Oh my God! There was that whole story. What happened to Lindsey Graham? Nothing happened to Lindsey Graham. That's who he's always been.
Yeah, I guess so.
In my opinion.
Yes. I think I agree.
I'm not surprised that Lindsey Graham did that.
No.
You know what I mean? It's like being surprised Ben Sass is a phony.
Oh. Well, okay. I don't know. I don't think I knew enough about him.
You wouldn't be surprised to find out Ben Sass is a complete phony.
Not now. At the time we first heard about him, I said, I don't know anything about this guy. Maybe, I don't know, Nebraska.
All right.
Sure.
Okay, how about Marco Rubio?
No, I never.
Little Marco.
No, yeah, okay. Again, the transfer. I feel like he feels worse about about doing it, but he does it anyway. Than Lindsey Graham, who just
you have to remember how we emerge on the scene. People don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He is the person I despise most in the world, even more than Trump. He is Marco Rubio because he knows better. But Marco Rubio is who he was. He was the Tea Party candidate in 2010. The Tea Party candidate.
I guess
then he became the immigration reform candidate.
Yeah, I guess I never really believed him I never believed him in the Tea Party role. I guess was the problem for me.
He was a fake then. He's a fake everything.
Yeah.
He'll betray everybody.
Well, yes. I never really bought him as a Tea Party stalwart.
He was a fake.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that explains it.
He's a fake. He's a complete phony, fake weasel.
I would say so. And he's an odd tweeter. I must say that. I noticed over the weekend.
He's an odd bird. Period. Yeah. I mean, to debase yourself in such a way. I mean, I understand he wants to be president. He thinks this is how he gets to be president. Then it'll be all worth it. All this debasement will be worth it because now I'm president. And, maybe he will be president. But boy, oh boy.
Yeah, it's been odd watching him, and I guess over the last week or so. His a lot of people have noted, for instance, his odd support for Trump's out of the blue insistence that he could and would and should change the 14th Amendment. Yeah. You stand in an odd position to support that change, Marco Rubio.
Yeah, because you're one who benefited from that provision of the Constitution.
Right. I mean, that's why you are, eligible to be president.
Well, of course, he lied about leaving Cuba because of Castro. His family left. His family was economic refugees in the mid-'50s.
Yes.
I mean, he's lied about himself basically always.
Yeah. I was surprised to see him tweeting about that and supporting that. And I was also surprised to see him tweeting, Friday, tweeting that about it and saying, criticizing everybody for criticizing all the critics of Trump's gambit here, saying, what did he say? He was like, this will be the week that will be remembered in history where everybody on Twitter became constitutional scholars all of a sudden. Yeah,
originalist.
Right. Which struck me on two fronts. One, him being a beneficiary of birthright citizenship, and two, I don't know. I think historians might remember the massacre in Pittsburgh for this week, but,
well, that too.
I know you had problems politically, so let's focus on that. It's a good thing there's no Jewish voters in Florida to hold you to account for that.
Yeah, I tell you, it's an interesting play. I mean, one of the things
to say the least,
is not about Rubio is his reading of Florida is always interesting to me. He thought that he could be the sensible citizen. Of course, he came back in the race and he won the Senate in 2016 pretty handily. Our candidate wasn't the best, but
no, your audio has cut out on
goodwill. So he was still.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, look, but I just don't know what his play is. I think he's now been, and I'm part of it. I think in it, but I think everybody's sort of just reading. Listen, you're just this weasel who will say anything. You don't really believe anything. You're all right, but you're not crazy because they still think he's not crazy. But you're pretty unprincipled.
Yes.
That's not a great reputation to have.
No.
If you want to run for anything, because frankly, even the diehard conservatives may have a hard time backing you up. And beyond that, I do think that Trump is really stoked the anti-Latino feeling in the Republican Party. So when you're in a Republican primary electorate, if you're running for president in particular, I think that's going to redound against you.
Yeah. I guess it will eventually. And all right, well, sooner rather than later, please, for Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, his Senate seat will probably be safe for a while, but I think he thinks he's running for president in 2024. And we'll see what happens and who he's running against. Hopefully it'll be a Democratic president at that point in time, but we'll see.
Okay.
So,
right.
What else can I tell you about my impressions? I think that it's so important that all I can think about is being nervous mostly right now.
Well, many people are, sure.
Be rational and analytical, right? I mean, it's not just because the uncertainty of elections are obviously the most important feature of elections, but it's so important. We got to win the House. We have to win the House.
Yes.
It doesn't bear thinking what happens if we don't win the House. I guess it does bear thinking, but it's hard to think about the day before the election.
Yeah, well, you need to put that aside at least for a day or two and just do your job. But
and hope we do win the House.
Yeah.
I know that I think we will, and that will be important to stopping Trump. I mean, it really is. Of course, it doesn't stop on nominees and whatnot, but in essence, you got to understand why is winning the House important. I guess that's worth considering for a few minutes before the break here.
Okay.
And it's one. You stop all legislation, right?
Yes.
They can't attack the Affordable Care Act and defeat. Well, they can actually, which. In this sense, there is this crazy lawsuit that's out there and this Texas judge who wants to strike down pre-existing conditions. Yes.
I mean, taking the House is important in terms of closing off traditionally accepted and legitimized avenues to attacking existing policy, et cetera, and creating new policy. Instead, it drives Trump into corners where he starts to try and do more, or at least drive the news cycle by pretending to amend law, change the Constitution, seize the property of his enemies, whatever, by diktat, by executive order, or by just let's see who tries to stop me sort of things, which will create a number of, I'm sure, awful confrontations / crises.
I don't know how Trump reacts if he loses the House. First of all, if he doesn't lose the Senate, he's going to say he won. That's number one, because that's how he rolls. We know that, right?
I assume that he will lie about what happened, yeah.
and then he'll spend 2 years yelling at Nancy Pelosi, right?
Yes, of course.
Because Nancy Pelosi's stopping the wall, and Nancy Pelosi's stopping
I guess
for the care.
Yeah, the big question is whether, for instance, he spends Wednesday saying, I didn't lose the House. This is a lie, and they cheated, and I'm going to, I don't know what. The FBI is going to investigate this. I don't know I don't know whether he tries that or not, if he's not sure that he can win it. But, I mean, a lot of people, that's a very big fear.
I mean, we'll have the House. I mean, in that sense, there won't be legislation. He'll try to do things by fiat. Whatever happens, he'll yell a lot about Nancy Pelosi, who I suspect, if we win the House, will announce almost immediately that this will be her last term as Speaker of the House.
Oh, maybe, yes.
I think that's sort of the deal they've cut. I don't think that's fair to her, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think that the deal that's getting cut is, okay, Nancy, you get to be Speaker, but you're announcing that you're retiring from Congress in 2 years. I mean, she's 70-something. I mean, honestly, there's an argument.
Sure. Yes. Of course. Well,
situation. And if she's retiring, well, here's what I'm thinking about it is, you don't want her to be the figurehead target in 2020. And I assume that's what everybody else says. And it says, well, Nancy Pelosi, well, she's retiring, so you guys need a new one.
Maybe. It may or may not work. There's no particular logic to it. They've been chanting, lock her up for 2 years.
I'm just telling you that's what I suspect is going to happen.
Yes, okay. Well, that may be the strategy behind it, but that won't stop them from saying it's Nancy Pelosi.
Does it matter?
Election.
I'm with you. I don't think it matters one way or the other, but people, think the way they think. The other thing is we get to investigate stuff.
Yes.
And there's a lot to investigate.
There is. That could lead us to the next segment of the show, actually. There's been a lot of
DC.
A lot of discussion about the, I guess people will argue about whether or not it's an expansion of the scope of the Mueller probe or simply doing a thorough job on the original scope. New York Magazine has a piece. It's actually, is it new or is it not new? It's actually old, from May, but it was being circulated this morning for whatever reason. But both Roger Stone under more direct scrutiny and expansion of the Mueller investigation to collusion with more than just Russia. And it may not be necessarily with respect to changing or guiding or skewing the outcome of the election, but policy collusion with the Trump administration, among their friends in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, elsewhere. There's going to be a lot to investigate, and even if the Senate investigations usually actually kind of suck anyway. To be honest, the House ones are the sharper, ones with the more punch most frequently, and not even because, even leaving impeachment as a question aside, which would have to start in the
impeachment. But here's an investigation. How is the Justice Department overseeing the Mueller investigation? Mm-hmm. So Rod Rosenstein goes, which is expected, right? And Noel Francisco, with his ethical waiver, gets to be involved.
Yes, and bringing his Noel Francisco values.
Bringing his Noel Francisco ethical waivers values.
Yes.
To it. Who waived the ethical waive was Don McGahn, of course. You bring all these people up, they have to testify. You have public hearings.
Mm-hmm. All right.
You say, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And this goes to the issue. The Mueller investigation is more protectable if we have the House.
Yes.
And of course, there's a million things to investigate. This is the most corrupt administration in history, from Wilbur Ross to Ryan Zinke, who still hasn't resigned.
Yes.
All right. Listen,
Surprisingly,
I'm going to let you have 30 minutes back of your show. Thanks for letting me talk about these things. And yes, I'm nervous.
I can tell.
I feel okay about it.
Okay, well, this is it. We didn't discuss, any breaking news or anything. I think everybody just kind of needs to huddle for a little while and talk about other things and say, all right, I cast my ballot. You need to do the same thing too. Now let's just hold our breath until Wednesday. Okay.
Exactly.
Thanks, Armando.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Go.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time to catch up with a little bit of what's in the news and a little bit of the news speculation, I guess, looking ahead. Let's make sure we round up a couple of the comments and story suggestions that have been sent our way, too. Mad Hatter also noting for us over in Texas that is the lieutenant governor race often that matters the most there. We do know that they have that weird form of government, the sort of weak governor model that they have in Texas, and I guess lieutenant governor perhaps even more influential there. And what do we have? So your note here is it's the lieutenant governor that matters the most, and Patrick is hated as, I guess, as much as Cruz. That's hard to imagine. What's wrong with that state? I can't figure it out. You guys love electing people that are widely hated. It's not your fault. I know. You're trying to do the opposite. All right, let's see. We've got other news items to keep up on. I guess the stupidity of the Brian Kemp accusations against the Stacey Abrams campaign and the Democrats there, the state Democrats in general, for trying to quote unquote hack the election sites is looking dumber and dumber. I was just pointed to a short item on Talking Points memo that was, alleged to have more information about it, although I'm not certain that it's more than I had already heard. I have a different report on it from Tom McKay, writing at Gizmodo, actually, on the subject. Brian Kemp's cyber crimes investigation against Democrats sure looks shady, and I think he fills in a pretty complete picture here. In case you haven't heard the background of the story, the Georgia Secretary of State and increasingly desperate Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp tied in the polls, according to some anyway, with Stacey Abrams, has shamelessly used his position as the state's top election monitor to purge hundreds of thousands of voters, those stories you've already heard, from the polls and close hundreds of polling sites over the past few years. On Sunday, he announced that his office is investigating a, quote, failed attempt to hack the state's voter registration system and named the Georgia Democratic Party as a suspect in, quote, possible cyber crimes, though Kemp did not clarify what those crimes were or pretty much anything else. In other words, this is a crappy, we'll say, for the sake of letting this go through on the air, Clue knockoff, and Kemp is Clue the game, and Kemp is accusing the Democratic Party of hacking the election computer in the computer room using the computer. No, really. That's actually kind of what he's saying. Now, according to the CNN reports on this one, the office of Brian Kemp, who is, as we already know, also a Republican candidate for governor, said in a Sunday morning news release that they will investigate the Georgia Democratic Party as part of its probe, which they cannot conduct, but did not offer any details on why it is investigating the Democratic Party. And then, quote, while we cannot comment on the specifics of an ongoing investigation, which it really isn't, I can confirm that the Democratic Party of Georgia is under investigation for possible cyber crimes, said Press Secretary Candace Broce, B-R-O-C-E. In the release, We can also confirm that no personal data was breached because no hacking was done, and our system remains secure, which it doesn't, but whatever. Now, background. Kemp has a well-documented history of either not understanding how computer systems that handle large amounts of data work or deliberately misleading people on the subject. In 2016, he accused the Department of Homeland Security, of an unsuccessful attempt to penetrate the Georgia Secretary of State's firewall. It later emerged that the alleged attack was routine traffic from a federal employee checking the state firearms license database as part of a background examination of private security guards at a federal facility, and the DHS concluded it would have been impossible to launch an attack from the DHS IP address involved. In 2017. In other words, basically, if you access the Secretary of State's public website to get regular information that is supposed to be publicly available for those who browse the Secretary of State's website, well, one, that's how you're supposed to be using their website. And two, I guess you could say, well, it's a failed attempt to hack the website in that there was no attempt made and no possibility of ever entering the system. But if you thought you were going to hack the system by typing secretary, sos.ga.gov or whatever their site happens to be, and you thought, well, that's going to let me hack the system. Well, you would be wrong, and you will have you'll come away with an unsuccessful attempt at hacking the system. That's basically what happened here. They took routine access to the site and decided it was, they're trying to hack us, but we rebuffed them because we have such robust defenses. You see, we stopped them in their tracks. In 2017, under Kemp's watch, a lawsuit alleged that the state exposed personal information of 6.7 million voters and election officials' credentials due to vulnerabilities in computer systems. That's the other problem, is he doesn't know how to actually secure the system. He's lying when he says we have such robust defenses. He has none. And every time somebody points that out, he says, how do you know that we have bad defenses? Were you trying to hack us? I charge you with hacking. And then we do this over and over. And now, this happened in 2016, it happened in 2017, and now here we are in 2018. He's doing it again. And, the media who we just, finally got to own up occasionally to, we shouldn't just print everything the president says, because sometimes he says things or threatens things and they don't come to fruition, or they were never serious in the first place, and we shouldn't get caught carrying water for him just because he put out a press release. Oh, but this isn't the president, let's do it again. Now, on that 2017 incident, as Slate wrote, state officials then conveniently wiped the servers involved in this exposure of personal information. And in either an incredible act of incompetence or an attempted cover-up to try to hide from the public a major election security lapse. Now, back in September of 2018, a federal judge found that Kemp's office had done virtually nothing to address vulnerabilities with its voting machines. More recently, according to the Washington Post, Kemp's office was ordered to stop holding up over 53,000 voter registration applications, 70% of them being African-American registrations, due to minor discrepancies with other state records like missing hyphens in names. We've heard about that story, and of course about the purges from the voter rolls there. Now, judging from a report in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, these new cyber crimes, this new investigation on Sunday, reeks of another attempt by Kemp to distract voters from how badly his office has bungled election security. A computer scientist and an attorney suing Kemp said his office's accusations of hacking is a distraction from a report that the voter information is vulnerable on the state's registration website, like it always has been. The Secretary of State's office said the system remains secure and voter information wasn't breached because no one was trying to breach it. You see, the vulnerability could allow someone to access voters' registration and personal information, said Richard DeMillo, a computer scientist at Georgia Tech. The way the website is set up, once you get access to your own voter record, you can go in and change permissions and get access to anyone's voting record, DeMillo said. According to a report on Who What Why, that's whowhatwhy.org, a site run by journalist Russ Baker, what may be happening is that security experts alerted Kemp's office to major vulnerabilities in election databases, whereupon Kemp promptly used that as an excuse to blame the whistleblowers. Baker has often been characterized as an untrustworthy source, apparently, and the report did not seem to have been verified by other media organizations as of early Sunday afternoon. However, Who What Why wrote that several security experts it had contacted had verified the vulnerabilities by examining the site's code and without actually accessing or altering protected data, and that the Georgia Democratic Party had already contacted computer security experts and notified them of the vulnerability by the time the cyber crimes announcement was made. Bruce Brown, counsel for the Coalition for Good Governance, which has been involved in lawsuits over the state's elections systems, he told Who What Why that he had also emailed Kemp's office on Saturday to report the vulnerabilities. What Kemp's office is doing is disingenuous, he said. Brown noted that at 7:03 p.m. last night, and I guess this would be Saturday, he had emailed John Salter and Roy Barnes, former governor of Virginia, in their capacities as counsel to Secretary of State Kemp to notify them of the serious potential cyber vulnerability in the registrations files that had been discovered without any hacking at all. Brown also told Kemp's lawyers that the information had already been forwarded to national intelligence officials. Kemp spokesperson, there's Candace again, denied Who What Why's report in a statement to the site. Gizmodo has reached out to the Georgia Democratic Party for comment and I guess hasn't yet heard back. In the meantime, Democratic officials are issuing blanket denials that any hacking attempt occurred and characterize Kemp's announcement as a last-minute dirty trick, which appears very much to be the case. There is an update down at the bottom here. Kemp's office released a statement to NBC News that seems to confirm that his investigation started after his legal team received a tip about vulnerabilities on state election websites. Now, they tried to give him this tip years ago, and he wasn't interested in it. And then I guess they tried to give it to him again, and then he accused them of hacking. How would you know about these vulnerabilities otherwise? I guess is his excuse. All right. Well, that's where we stand. The, what was it? The More on Kemp Scam piece from Josh Marshall was from yesterday afternoon. Turns out the backstory on Kemp's accusation is about as stupid as you could imagine, according to this report. And guess what? They referenced the Who What Why report here. No wonder. Okay, so I guess we're all caught up here. Instead of focusing on fixing the vulnerabilities that have been reported to him, he accuses the people who pointed it out to him of creating those vulnerabilities. This despite the fact that those vulnerabilities existed at least a year ago when he found himself in court having to defend his actions for not fixing them and for having rebuffed federal help with that all along. Okay, well, that's an interesting approach to things, to say the least. All right, let's see. What else do we need to bring up in our closing segment here that would be helpful? I mentioned a very nice thread from David Neer when we were talking to Greg. This, I think, would be helpful for building some context for however things come out, say, for instance, in Texas in the Senate race on Tuesday night when we finally start to get the results. Win or lose, there's important progress has been made there. And David's actually talking about Georgia, and in particular the 6th district, which we mentioned with Greg, where John Ossoff recently ran in was a special election, right? In Georgia 6. David summarizes things this way. Tremendously gratified to see this, he says. John Ossoff helped put something important in motion and left an immediate legacy. The alumni of his grassroots army are running for office too, and crediting his campaign, which of course was, we all know that campaign was a loss and everybody was disappointed. We came this close. Wouldn't it have been a great momentum builder to flip that seat, etc.? It was always a long shot. He came closer than anybody ever expected. But ultimately it was an L, and don't we simply walk away and shake our heads and say, L's suck, but gosh, that's just so depressing. We are constantly registering L's. No. As David points out, the alumni of his grassroots army are themselves now running for office and crediting his campaign for getting local Democrats organized. That's how he made it close in Georgia 6, despite all the odds, right? And this is how you build a movement. He is quoting the tweet of Reed Epstein here, which says John Ossoff gets maligned in D.C., but remains very popular among Georgia 6 Dems. Got a huge hand at a Lucy McBath house party. 6 of his former campaign staff and volunteers are on the ballot themselves next week. That would be this week. Now McBath has built on his network for her campaign. David's next tweet. This piece by Greg Bluestein goes into more detail on 4 Ossoff alumni who are running for State House in the Georgia 6th District area. He also goes on to say, here is a really concrete piece on the Ossoff Georgia 6 legacy, the kind you'll miss if you look solely at short-term win-loss stats. Dem candidates in the area now have excellent data on which voters to target. And he's got a screenshot from, I don't know, is it from the Bluestein article talking about these state house races. It's brief. Let's take a look. Mike Walensky in Dunwoody-based District 79 planned to run for the state house before the 6th district race began, but saw a growth in Democratic campaign resources after Ossoff's congressional race ended. There was, quote, very little information at all about who were Democrats in this district before Ossoff's campaign. Walensky said Ossoff's campaign's non-stop canvassing, it reportedly attempted more than 1 million door knocks, allowed Walensky and other Democratic state House candidates to better assess their chances and figure out their likely supporters. David now continues, what's more, it gave progressives in a traditionally Republican area a reason to believe in the value of long-term organizing. For a district that's trending blue, that's enormously valuable. Again, another screenshot here that reads, before the special election campaign, there was no organizing in the East Cobb area, Johnson said. We don't know who Johnson is in this picture unless you read the article. What she found, though, in the 6th district race and now in her own, is that many of the Democrats getting involved are mothers like herself. And, again, good information. There's more, a little bit, by the way. It's getting those moms out and getting engaged. You know about suburban moms. Johnson said, in East Cobb, I never in a million years thought there would be so many people who are progressive, moderate, liberal, that are my neighbors. That's important to find out. Usually lawn signs will tell you, but maybe not. David continues once again, the Georgia 6th special election was the first step in a long-term project. But in the short term, it also showed Democrats could make major inroads in once solidly Republican suburbs, a vital part of the 2018 roadmap. And now, quoting Brendan Welch, who tweets, not to mention all the Ossoff alumni that spread out to work on House races all over the country. His campaign got staff trained and connected, and that matters. Very true. And one last tweet in the thread here. David simply remarking, love this. A tweet from Marie Solis, who writes, John Ossoff, last year's Democratic candidate, is here, stumping for McBath and other progressives running down ballot, many of whom were inspired to run after working on his 2017 campaign. So even in losses, properly run, there is a foundation on which to build and win long term. I thought that was pretty important, something to keep in mind. Maybe it would have been a better Tuesday piece in case you have a long night ahead of you, watching returns in some of your favorites for whom you hoped, for whom you have high hopes, maybe, perhaps, don't benefit from the wave, whether it materializes or not, or lose a close race by 1 point. It's not the end of the world, and it's not the end of the line either. It shows vulnerability, and it means that somebody with a well-organized campaign can come back and snatch that away next time. definitely worth keeping in mind for the long term. Okay, let's see. Do we indulge the Roger Stone stuff here at this point? Do we just hang on to that maybe as red meat stuff for tomorrow? I don't know. Let's see. Just sort of scanning a number of other things. There was a big, and I think long read in the New York Times over the weekend that many of you would have seen. They made a very big deal out of releasing the story early, I think, over at the Times. But it will be required reading in whole or in part in the next couple of days. Anyway, U.S. law enforcement failed to see that the threat of white nationalism. Now they don't know how to stop it. This, of course, old story to you and me, not just because of listening to the show, but because of being aware of, politics in progressive circles for a long time, and having enough memory to crack jokes about "I'm so old I remember when" sort of things about you remember the initial reports in the Department of Homeland Security sector about white nationalism and rising white nationalism becoming a worrisome source of domestic terrorism, and how the right howled, although I don't know if it was necessarily foreseeable at the time that that was going to be a significant portion of a Trump base. It was still, and I mean, that's an important part of the picture. Even without Trump yet in the picture, Republicans knew that it would be white nationalists, that they, if they could be rallied to vote, it would inure to the benefit of Republicans and not Democrats. Anyway, so they howled and screamed and cried and worked the refs, as they often do, and essentially insisted that this thing be retracted and renounced. And in the meantime, things only got worse. What a terrific surprise! But we'll need more time, I think, in order to really dig into that situation. Let's see. Perhaps another interesting idea that we could spend just a few minutes on. Actually, a Twitter thread that Bill called to everyone's attention, and it included mine. Not me specifically, didn't tag it to me, but I happened to be following along as you are. And I said, you may have something here. This is something he tweeted along just with the comment, super thread. And not like, da-da-da-da-da, super thread, but it's a super well put thread. It's from Heather Cox Richardson, an historian. It's important for you to remember that's supposed to be an, not a historian, but it doesn't say that in her profile. But I'm a stickler for that old-fashioned formulation. And historian, author, professor, budding curmudgeon, she says, by the way. And she had this to say, I guess since we're constantly talking about this, we're always talking about Republicans and their roots. And you'll find on Twitter very frequently Republican trolls, Charlie Kirk types, right? Constantly complaining that, I don't understand this whole idea that African Americans ought to be voting for Democrats. After all, it was Republicans that were the first original anti-slavery campaigners. And yeah, what have you done for me in the last 150 years kind of comes up. But every once in a while, it's worth examining the origins of the party. Slightly different angle on this one, but Heather Cox Richardson points out in what Bill deems to be a super thread the following. Apparently, some folks are just now learning Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. I don't know how that could be. Lincoln helped organize the GOP, as they like to call themselves, the GOP, as I call them, in the 1850s. He and his colleagues articulated a vital American ideology and then put it into practice. Let's take a look at Lincoln and his GOP, shall we? Well, we're going to, so that question is answered. But this, I think, more so than convincing us of the fundamental change in the focus of the Republican Party so that you can answer people like the Republican trolls on Twitter. This, I think, a better lesson in resistance and what popular political movements can really do. Hopefully we won't have to necessarily resort to this. It would be nice if we had the House of Representatives in our hands, but this is just an interesting organizing tale. In the 1850s, rich slave owners, less than 1% of the population, if you think things are tough now, between the 1% and the 99%, this was less than 1%, they controlled the federal government and ran it for their own benefit, refusing to pay taxes, sounds familiar, or submit to regulation, but demanding federal power to hunt down their slaves and protect slavery. They silenced opposition by controlling the media, warned voters that slavery was all that protected the status of poor white men, and insisted that they had the right to spread slavery to the West. And then, nationally, because the Constitution protected property, which of course to them included slaves. Slavery choked out poor white workers. This is not often thought about, who could not compete with rich landowners, but slave owners thought that that was good because rich men were the nation's true leaders anyway, and supervising those lesser beings who actually did the productive work. As James Henry Hammond said, and this is an interesting excerpt from a Senate speech of 1858, in all social systems there must be a class to do the menial duties, to perform the drudgery of life. That is, a class requiring but a low order of intellect and but little skill. Its requisites are vigor, docility, fidelity. Such a class you must have, or you would not have that other class which leads progress, civilization, and refinement. The leisure class, of course. It constitutes the very mudsill of society and political government, and you might as well attempt to build a house in the air as to build either the one or the other, except on this mudsill. Well, Hammond continued, and it was imperative that those mudsills did not vote, because they would want more of the money they produced, and the wealthy could not continue to amass fortunes and direct society as they wished. Slave owners must keep power to make the U.S. great, perhaps for the first time, if not again. Lincoln, the brilliant son of a poor man, had worked his way up from field work to becoming a prominent lawyer. He was appalled at this perversion of principle. The Declaration of Independence called for the equality of opportunity that enabled a man to rise, not for the establishment of a ruling class. Lincoln denied, get this, that capital should rule labor. Instead, workers, producers, who were the heart of the nation's economy and thus the heart of the nation, should be our chief interest. It was workers, not capitalists, who drove growth. They must have a say in their government, or the rich would choke them out and turn America into an oligarchy that would become mired in the past, because the wealthy hated innovation, because that makes money move away from them, you see. And they have, therefore, no incentive to do it. And there are some great quotes from Lincoln speeches to prove the point. You should read them for yourselves, because we won't have time to share them. But when the new Republican Party then ran Lincoln for president in 1860, slaveholders warned that black Americans would rise up, raping and killing whites. They made sure poor whites could get real news and couldn't get real news and kept restive poor whites from the polls, as happens today. Yes, when Lincoln won anyway, the slaveholders immediately created their own nation, based in the idea that some men were better than others. They made war on the United States. That didn't go well, and they promised their followers that secession, though, would be bloodless, because Northerners were weaklings. Note Trump's latest inflammatory and incendiary comments about the forces arrayed against him. If you haven't heard about that one, we'll bring that one to your attention probably tomorrow. They promised, though, a bloodless secession, and, it didn't really work out that way, did it? Of course, it was, 620,000 Americans died, and unbelievable losses. Meanwhile, the funding and manning the war forced Republicans to codify their principle that men at the bottom fueled the economy. They weighted finances toward the poor, creating new national money backed by the Treasury and not by bankers, and floating bonds to regular folks. Well, the thread goes on, and we're not going to be able to finish it because it is rather lengthy. Well worth your time, but an interesting, does dual duty. both in teaching us our history and in refuting the nonsense that somehow the Republican Party always has been for the freedom and advancement of African Americans and has never changed, and it's Democrats who's always stood in opposition. So they can disarm the trolls, educate you. I wish we had more time to do it, but of course it's time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I can guarantee you by staying close to your radio and or computer, you'll hear more about all the other amazing stories of the day that we did not yet get a chance to touch on. Perhaps we can squeeze word in on those next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
You know, we didn't get to discuss much about Trump-Russia today, even though things I said are heating up. Well, the real action may be going on the other side of the ocean. It turns out a probe that has prompted fresh calls to pause Britain's EU departure. British police investigating now Brexit campaigners who received millions in illicit Russian funding. Stay tuned.